1. Until today, I thought that I had lost a year of my life somewhere. According to my birth certificate, school records, etc., I was born in October 1984. According to the scholastic guidelines, anyone born after September 30th, 1984 would have missed the cutoff to begin kindergarten in September 1989. However, I have an extremely sharp memory. I can remember people that I've only met once. Trivial details of brief conversations that I've had with people. The one thing that my memory attaches to are repeating patterns, especially vocal cadences. For example, theme songs to popular TV shows or the way people will greet other people. I can distinctly remember learning the calendar the first week of school. My teacher taught us the month, August, the day, 30th, and the cadence of the year, 1989. This sticks out in my head so well because of the first time we had to recite the date in January when we came back from holiday break. 1990. It stuck out in my head because it didn't flow as well. It wasn't as graceful. 1990 was the year I thought my father had passed away. According to his death certificate, it was 1991. It was the year between kindergarten and first grade. It did feel like an excruciatingly long summer and year, but I never gave it thought because I was grieving for my father. As I look back on kindergarten pictures, it has the date on the school picture, taken in the fall as 1990. I graduated high school in 2003, just like everyone else in that kindergarten picture. The 1989 date doesn't conflict with anyone else. Everyone I went to high school with doesn't question that we started kindergarten in 1990. However, there was one girl who also picked up on the 1989 date. During some BS conversation during a study hall, kindergarten comes up and she says, "We started kindergarten in 1989, didn't we?" A friend of hers did the math, and she didn't say anything else about it. I didn't speak up because I was different enough as it was. Up until today, I thought I had lost a year of my life somewhere. Perhaps I want to believe in the Mandela effect or something like it. But it sure answers a lot of questions. 2. The summer of 2010, my boyfriend at the time and I were subletting an apartment in Back Bay in Boston. It was just the two of us at the time in a 4-bedroom apartment. The apartment belonged to a bunch of spoiled rich kids who went to college with us, whose parents paid the rent. They didn't really care if they got subletters for the summer or not. I was waiting tables at TGI Fridays, a job I hated, but kept to pay rent until I could find my real job. He was working for a real estate company and was already doing the 9 to 5, so I got out of work at a normal time around 10 or 11 and caught the bus home just like every other night, and he was already asleep when I got back. I set into my little routine to wind down before bed. I lit a hookah. We were big on smoking hookah at the time. Grabbed my laptop and settled in on the living room couch to watch TV. The way this apartment was set up was that if you walked in the front door, you would enter a foyer, off to which all the rooms stemmed. Kitchen and 2 bedrooms to the right, bathroom straight ahead, living room and 2 more bedrooms to the left. From each of the rooms you can see into the foyer, but the best vantage point for this was the kitchen or living room. They were the only rooms diagonally across from one another, and the only rooms you can see through the foyer into the opposite room. So I'm sitting on the couch, which is facing the TV and the foyer, and I see what I thought was my boyfriend walk out of our bedroom and disappear behind a wall. This seemed normal. The doorways are only so wide, so you would see someone walk out of the room, disappear for a moment behind the walls as they walk through the foyer, then reappear in the doorway to the living room. Only he never came in the living room. I sat for a moment until it became clear no one was there. I called to him. Nothing. I stood up and looked into the foyer and kitchen, nothing. Freaked out, I called my mom and told her what I saw. A guy I thought was my boyfriend with light hair, wearing a navy blue Red Sox t-shirt. Never heard any doors opening or closing. No one turned out to be in the apartment except us two. So my mom had me convinced it was a ghost. Which made sense. This is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe the ghost looked just like my ex, or maybe it was a glitch in the Matrix, another reality where I woke him up with the TV too loud. 3. I remember when I was around 7 or 8 years old, going on a family vacation in Utah. I don't quite remember why, but my reasoning concludes that it must have had something to do with my dad's family, or a BYU football game. My dad's a huge fan. While we were there, we went to a local amusement park called Lagoon. In Lagoon, there was this one area that was like a hub, with cement blocks holding small trees scattered about in a medium-sized open area, surrounded by paths to go to certain subsections of the park, and a few different attractions, namely a wooden roller coaster, a carousel, and a pavilion-like area, where they were having a lip-syncing show every other hour. Of course, as a family of 5, we argued about what we should ride next, and we came with a compromise. My older brother and dad would go ride one ride, I would ride the wooden roller coaster, and my sister and mom would ride the carousel. Each ride, after all, were all near each other, so everyone assumed I wasn't going to get lost. If I were to get off my ride before anyone else, I were to wait on a cement block holding a tree nearby the entrance to the wooden roller coaster. After this was established, we all went our separate ways. The line for the roller coaster was extremely short, and I was able to get on very quickly. The ride also didn't last very long, probably due to the fact that it was so long, and I got off my ride before anyone else. I did what I was instructed, and sat on top of the cement block. After a while, I started to get anxious. It had been almost a half an hour, and none of my family members had met up with me. I needed something to take the unease off of me, and I remember the lip-sync show starting up in the pavilion, conveniently located a bit ways in front of the block I was sitting on. I remember needing to buy a ticket to get into the pavilion itself, but the speakers were loud enough for me to enjoy the music, and I was just tall enough to get a little glimpse at the elaborate performances taking place. Here's where the story gets a little bit weird. I was sitting there watching, listening to the show, when I noticed that on regular intervals, security officers would pace back and forth in front of me, looking straight down at the ground. One of these officers stuck out to me, a mixed-race, slightly shorter woman with a black leather jacket on. After a while, I get the impulse to look to the right, and right there I see my entire family. My mother hysterical, my brother and father trying to comfort her, and my youngest sister oblivious to the situation. I remember going to my family and asking where have they been, and my mother being ecstatic that I was found. I asked her where they had been, and she said where she told me to wait, then pointed to a cement ledge with 5 different sodas on it. We started walking, and the same multiracial woman started asking my mother for information, only to be quickly assured that I had been found. What was weird was that we were heading in the exact opposite way that I saw the officer walk towards, and the park didn't loop around in the direction she went. Fast forward to fairly recently, and I had been assigned to speak in church. And I said this same story and somehow connected it to Jesus watching over us. After we got home, my dad, mom, and little sister all claimed that I told the story wrong, and that I was in fact inside of the pavilion watching the show, which was free. We were arguing about this for a bit, when my older brother stepped in and vouched for me, saying that I was the correct one. To this day, we still bicker about which version of the story is true, and we have never come to a conclusion about which had happened. 4. To start, I'd like to say that I am 25, single, never married, and I don't have any children. I am significantly older in some of these worlds, at least a decade in most of them. And the ones that I can see myself, the ones when I'm at home and have a mirror or window access. They even look a little different, older, different hairstyles that I have never even considered. Heavier, pregnant, etc. For about a year, I've been having these ridiculously realistic daydreams, and dreams followed by intense feelings of emptiness, or like something important is missing. The feeling of missing something has been physical and emotional. Here are a few moments I've had. Number 1, I was driving in my car fully awake, when I kind of felt a slip, and I looked in my rear view mirror and I saw a car seat, a little girl, hockey equipment in the car with me. I also realized that I was in a completely different vehicle, and had a ring on hand and different hair. In the dream, my hair was still relaxed, but shorter than I've ever worn it. I went natural a couple of months after this dream. Number 2. This one was one of the earliest, and I just assumed it was a vivid dream. It left me confused for a few days because it felt so real. In it, I was walking around a house that feels familiar, but can't remember ever being in such a house. There were pictures of that version of me, family around the house. There was a solo picture of my husband, and a man's wedding ring in a box on the dresser. A fairly recent dream revealed my husband was some type of law enforcement and died on duty. The most recent encounter is what encouraged me to write this. I think I'm most connected to this reality, no idea why, but I've had the most encounters with it. Number 3. Same reality with dead husband. Fully awake moment, and I was driving in my car when I heard my own voice say, "He's gone," but I didn't move my lips. I also had no reason to say that because I was listening to the Sleeping Beauty soundtrack. I started crying, which further freaked me out. My ring finger felt naked, and it felt like more people should be in the car with me after the slip. None of my close family members or friends are recently deceased. Last death was over a decade ago. I'll now note that I didn't see anything in this one, and the crying wasn't sobbing, just a few tears that surprised me. Number 4. I'm assuming this reality is the same as the first one, or at least very similar. I'm at a child's hockey game with a little girl probably 3 years of age in my lap. Her older brother, maybe 10, is playing, and I'm surrounded by other parents. This was the first and only time I've seen the older child in one of these. Those were just a few, but I've had more than I can count, of just normal, everyday moments from the other versions. Sorry they're not very detailed and sound fragmented. I wrote these down during study breaks. Thanks for reading and for any feedback. Edit. This is to address some concerns some of you have had. I apologize again for having written the original post quickly, and left several things unclear. I call them slips and daydreams because they are quite brief while I'm awake, not long enough to even notice a time difference. They are a slip in focus as opposed to a slip in consciousness. I assume the slip is me losing focus, which is why they do not last long, because I realize I'm not paying attention. When there are images and not just a feeling, it is different, just like a superimposed image over what I'm currently seeing. It doesn't obscure anything. The incident in the car that I mentioned is the only car slip. As to the idea of it being a past life, sure, I have no idea. I posted this to get feedback. As I've mentioned, I have seen myself a few times and I look like me. I've also looked at others and the way they're dressed and assumed it was modern because of that. 5. When I was growing up, I was female. I was very uncomfortable with myself. I'm a male now, and would often joke about it. As a kid, I wanted to be a stand-up comedian like a lot of my favorite comics I used to listen to. My mom is a hardcore Christian and refused to let me, saying I needed to grow up, marry a Christian man, have kids and get a desk job. I never wanted that. Well, she often would discourage me, and it dwindled to me giving up on my stand-up dream at a young age. I used to go to church a lot, and one day, after giving up, I met this man at my church. He seemed excited to see me, and told me I looked so different. I was really confused, as I never met him, but being raised to be respectful to adults, I just thanked him. He walked off, and about an hour later, church ended. I was walking from the teen group to the main church service, since adults and teens, I was about 16, learn different things. I waited for the adults to get out when this guy walked back up to me. Once again, he was excited, and asked me a few things I can't remember right now. But the last thing he said to me before leaving, I remembered clear as day. He said, "You're such a good performer. Thank you for helping my son, we always laugh." At the time, I was in a church play, and we played a few times, so I assumed that's what he was talking about. I said thank you, he laughed and said, "Keep it up, Simba," and walked off. I didn't think much of it, since Simba was my nickname around church due to the large amount of Lion King stuff I owned. Well, 18 came. I moved to Kansas, lived there a few years, and recently moved back to California. Now, this is where it gets weird. I grew up in Southern, but now I live in Northern, and I'm working at an IHOP. I recently did my first set of stand-up, and I was in shock when it got 1,600 plus views within the first week of being posted. Now, that's not intense, but for it being my first act, I was pretty proud of it. Well, I'm currently a waiter while I do stand-up on the side. I'm 3 years on male hormones and a month away from my first surgery. The same man who I saw in church that day walked in not 10 minutes ago, him and his daughter. I didn't recognize him at first. It wasn't until later, when I heard him talking to his daughter about my old church, did it hit me. He came to the counter to pay. I didn't expect him to recognize me, and without thinking, I said, "How's your son?" He looked really confused and said, "I only have a daughter." His daughter was wearing a binder, mind you. How do I know? Because I've worn one for 5 years. I can tell between a binder and a sports bra, and a dude's tank top. I just laughed and said I mistook him for someone else. I asked if he ever lived in Southern, and he said he and his daughter were currently on their way to Southern. I'm a little speechless. Sure, maybe it's a different guy. Maybe I did mistake him for someone else. But all I know is that no one knew this guy when I was 16 and asking around. His daughter might be closeted trans, and my stand-up is me poking fun at being transgender. I'm sorry if this is a bit muddled. I'm really freaked out because now everything feels really off. Not to mention, but my mom remembers me telling her about this dude from when I was 16, and I vividly remember her rolling her eyes when I told her he called me by my nickname and now legal name. I'm spooked. Really spooked. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, Episode 12. Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you very much to the 5 individuals for the kindness in allowing me to use their stories. I think it's been a couple of weeks since I did a glitch video, hasn't it? Well, I don't know if you guys remember me mentioning the other day that I had to try and scramble to get as much work as I could done a bit early because I would have workmen coming on the Monday to start erecting scaffolding. Yes, well, they did technically start erecting scaffolding on the Monday in my street. They just didn't get to my house till today, which meant, I didn't get to bed till late, which I'm always up late anyway, at least by my own standards. Then they start, so that means I'm trying to get to sleep and I can't. Then, of course, the guy came and decided they had to inspect the heating to make sure everything was okay with it, so that was fun. Bright side is, I don't need to arrange to have my roof repaired, because that's what the scaffolding is about. They're doing that, and they're putting rough casting on the houses, I think, which seems a bit pointless to me, but I'm sure it'll look nice when it's done. Okay, that's enough grumbling from me, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.